what kind of data do you have, and then you have to make sure to choose the right level of protection it requires.
Are we talking about your own internal customer, or your own data, operational data? And how sensitive is the data itself? Or are you talking about data that you obtain from other organizations that you need to collaborate with? Or are you talking about data that you obtain through commercial agreements? Likely you end up treating all those data sets not in one way, because they often come with different rights, different obligations, different risks.
WGIC Horizons, a podcast for latest technology, business, partnerships, and policy trends in geospatial industry.
Welcome to Horizons, a World Geospatial Industry Council podcast. My name is John Renard, and I'm a WGIC board member and founder of Airdale Advisory Limited. In this episode, I'm joined by Kerstin Van De Sand, Head of Developers and Location Services, Esri Germany, and Joris Bak, Deputy Director, Esri Netherlands. As part of our series of podcasts that address geospatial data and its application in the world, today we will talk about data sovereignty. So both of you, welcome. Just a couple of opening comments. So data sovereignty is one of the most important and challenging issues facing the wider geospatial community. In the past, organizations, and that's often governments, could control the collection, conversion, storage, and dissemination of spatial information. In effect, they could manage and respect the boundaries of data sovereignty. However, with the huge rise and positive impact of open data sources, such as OpenStreetMap, coupled to the exponential growth and use of the cloud and the benefits that can be derived from trained AI systems on large and diverse global data sets, these boundaries are being challenged and new thinking, models and frameworks are being explored. So in this podcast, we will hear about organizations from different countries, about how organizations from different countries are responding to these challenges, and how software and technology are enabling us to reconcile data sovereign conflicts. Okay, so I'd like to start maybe with you, Kerstin, and just open the conversation with something around some of the definitions. So I guess we often hear terms like data sovereignty, data residency, data localization, and kind of used interchangeably. So can you walk us through some of the key differences between them and where legal jurisdiction actually sits in each case?
Sure, John. So data residency actually refers to the physical or geographic location of data. So the only question here is, where is the data actually located or stored? Data localization is on a far different end. It is a it's a policy requirement that actually mandates that specific data has to be stored. And often also processed exclusively in defined national territory. So this might be the case with very specific sector data like health data or text data or telecommunications data. Data sovereignty, on the other hand, is a totally different thing. So it refers to the right and ability of an organization or a state to determine how data is used, processed, shared, and protected, regardless of where the data actually physically is stored. So for data sovereignty, we have a real legally binding definition here in Germany or in the EU, I guess. So it's more embedded in a broader concept of digital sovereignty. And I noted down a little bit of a definition by an institution here in Germany, which defines digital sovereignty as the ability of government, public administration, and businesses to use technologies and data independently, securely, and legally. So having this framework around data sovereignty, for me, data sovereignty means you have to maintain or control the control over data. You have to determine who might access this data, and you have to make sure it's governed that it's governed under national or European law, and you have to protect it against unauthorized foreign access. So to sum this a little bit up, data residency specifies where, data localization specifies where it must be, and data sovereignty specifies who decides, or in the end, which law applies in the event of a dispute. So in the end, the specific nature of data in question is the deciding factor. So what kind of data do you have? What is involved? And then you have to make sure to choose the right level of protection it requires.
Great. That's a very detailed and useful basis. And I guess it clearly demonstrates the legal and technological issues around this. Joris, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on to that before I maybe sort of look at some of the specific practical implications of that.
Yeah, I think great definition. And I think at the end, what Kerstin mentioned is really important, right? I think to me, when I usually talk to customers and users about this, it's all about being in control. And I think what sometimes happens is sometimes people consider it as being a yes or no. Yes, data sovereignty, or no, I cannot obtain it. But I think it's really important to sort of make two additional comments on what Kerstin said, is that I think when we talk about data sovereignty, it's important that we sort of ensure that we make clear what data are we talking about. So obviously in the context of this podcast, we're talking about geographical data, but are we talking about your own internal customer or your own data, operational data, and how sensitive is the data itself? Or are you talking about data that you obtain from other organizations that you need to collaborate with? Or are you talking about data that you obtain through commercial agreements? Likely you end up treating all those data sets not in one way, because they often come with different rights, different obligations, different risks. So to me, I think it's important that you sort of, as an organization, really consider what data are we talking about, and how does these requirements that you might have when it comes to data sovereignty apply to those different types of data sets. So that's the sort of first additional comment that I wanted to make. And I think the second part is that I think it's important that when you think about that data, also think about classifying your data, because even when you're only looking at your own internal data as organization, you likely, it's not a binary yes or no question to me. It's like you have data that is mission critical, needs to be highly available, which may be acceptable that you have certain dependencies with cloud environments, for example. On the other hand, you have privacy, really sensitive, regulated data that you that require often more stronger control. So I think it's important to view sovereignty through what I like to call sort of a risk-based lens, to give you room for strategic maneuvers instead of seeing it as a binary yes or no kind of topic.
Okay, that's great. So if we sort of put that in a more practical sort of context and look at some examples, so how would you look at the sort of balance between local and on-premise infrastructure as opposed to regional or cloud, to make sure that these data sovereignty issues are addressed? So is that down to the type of data, or and how does that particularly apply in terms of things like a regional first model? Maybe Joris, you could speak again to that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to start with, I think it's important that we sort of look first at what are the challenges that many organizations are facing. And today, if we look, for example, in the Netherlands, I think this is applicable to the entire European region, then we have challenges on housing shortage. We have an energy crisis, an energy transition going on. We have climate change, and we need to adapt to climate change. There's emergency response. So obviously all those challenges are highly data intensive. So it requires a lot of data to be fused, but the data often doesn't only exist in your own organization, right? You need to be able to share and collaborate with data. So for a lot of those use cases, it's not only about ensuring that that you control your data in a sovereign way and that you are able to protect it, but on the same hand, you still also need to be able to actually share the data, make it highly available, so actually people can collaborate on those challenges. So that's a sort of interesting, sort of, you might say, sometimes could be a conflict, actually. So I think in many cases, when it comes to those challenges that I just mentioned, it often makes sense to actually leverage cloud technology to store your data, to make it highly available, accessible. It's often properly secured because there's large teams involved to securing those environments. And I think when I talk with organizations about data sovereignty, I often ask them the question when they say, well, where is the data stored? The first thing I think it's important to talk about is what problem are you trying to solve by storing data in a certain, let's say, sovereign or perhaps even purely local environment? What's the actual problem that you're trying to achieve and solve? Because sometimes what you can see is that when we talk about this topic, I think that if sovereignty itself becomes the goal rather than a mean to manage risk, that could easily result in something that we, I think, all agree on, that that's not of our general interest in the world when it comes to those challenges that I just mentioned, right? We can, when we store data more locally, it could result in more friction when it comes to collaboration, innovation, your ability as an organization to respond in emergency scenarios. So what I already mentioned, I think this is important, that this is actually where I think data classification again comes in. So you can make well-informed decisions on how to treat what type of data and whether that needs to be really stored locally or can be easily stored in a cloud environment. And some data sets just make sense to be able to store it globally, right? Like base maps, which are often highly used. Also, perhaps real-time monitoring data, like flood sensors, for example. On the other hand, if you have really privacy-related data, like parcel information and ownerships, obviously you want to treat that really secure. So I do think that when I look at the developments and how we talk about this topic in the Netherlands, but also in the Europe region, there's definitely a growing awareness when it comes to where your data are stored. And that all has to do with the geopolitical situation. However, I do think that to me, it's not about either what I already said, a yes or a no discussion, like either now move everything back from the cloud to your on-premise environment. It's all about, for me, it's about making with the concept of being in control, it's about managing your risks and considering not picking one model and where you store your data, but making a balanced decision on what type of data are you going to store where, either on premises or in a regional first or a cloud environment globally. It's all about freedom of choice, that customers have freedom of choice. And I do foresee that it's not a revolution, I think, but a sort of evolution, that more and more focus will be happening on a sort of regional level, where we, for the last, let's say, 1 or 2 decades, we've been moving to global. With all the geopolitical discussions going on, I do see more increased awareness on regional. But I think the definition on regional will be different per region or per country. We might think of the Netherlands relatively small, that regional could be European, but perhaps Germany is thinking in another way about it. So I think there will be a sort of evolution towards more awareness on where the data are stored. I don't think it will be all moving back to on-premises, but I think ideally, properly informed separation between the different types of data, and then indeed regional will become more urgent. But I think, my definition of region would be, I think, European scope. But it would be interesting to hear from Kerstin how she's thinking about this from a Germany perspective. Is that also European, or is Germany the region then in that case, for example?
And Kerstin, as you sort of, I'll let you answer that and add your comments. And also, I guess, just picking up on something you said around the cloud, and clearly a huge factor. But in the current climate, even given that most of the cloud technology is US, again, there's this whole concern, or there seems to be in Europe, about a reliance on US technology. And again, how does that fit into the sovereignty issue? Because ultimately, as we're seeing with many people in the States who are starting to be sanctioned, suddenly they lose, literally everything. No phone, no internet, no cloud, no email. So again, that must be a huge risk in the sovereignty landscape when you look at a region, any other region than the US or China. So maybe, Kerstin, you could add your comments to Joris, and also just maybe comment a little bit on the infrastructure piece as well, and how that fits into the sovereignty play.
I'm pretty much with Joris and what he said. So it's not a black and white decision between a purely national infrastructure and a fully centralized global cloud. Both have their pros and cons. So as a data owner or data provider, you have to decide based on the data you actually have which infrastructure you choose, so to speak. So I think in the end, as Joris said, we will increasingly moving forward to like layered resilience architecture or infrastructure. So we'll have this first level of local sovereign edge for mission critical data, for emergency services, for critical infrastructure data and the like. And then you will have a second kind of tier, like a regional sovereign cloud or a national sovereign cloud, where you can exchange data, where you have a harmonized governance or a federated trust framework. Like, for example, in the EU, the whole topic about data spaces, for example. And then you will have a third tier for global interoperability. As a humankind, we have we have challenges, we face challenges, and we have to collaborate on this data, for example, or based on this data, for example, climate change and stuff like this. So there is a need for AI scaling, for global resilience, for work together on data or based on common data. So in my point of view, the shift we just see is not, so sovereignty is not really about privacy anymore. It's also, as Joris described, about resilience and recoverability. And you have to make sure that your data is sovereign if it needs such kind of sovereignty.
I think, Kerstin, just to sort of, from a really practical point of view, if I look at, for example, how as Esri Netherlands, one of our teams is doing a lot of data hosting to empower our users, for example, but also to sometimes host on behalf of those customers their data. And I think we sort of have, could say, a 3 sort of levels of where we store the data. And I think we are just another organization as many organizations, right? So we are also treating not every data the same way. So we have set up infrastructure locally within the Netherlands in a local cloud provider. So there are many alternatives to the large cloud environments globally or US based. We have, so the data types that we host in our regional cloud, you could say, or in this case, the within the country, those are really the data sets that have the most strict requirements when it comes to data sharing. It's really personal, privacy related information. So there's laws involved, there's certification involved, and you can still leverage cloud components for highly available resilience reasons. But indeed, it's definitely a well-made decision to do it from the beginning within the Netherlands borders. But it doesn't mean that we host everything there, because some data is just more easy, or it's cheaper, or there's so many reasons how you could look at it. It's a bit more flexible, because the more we need to manage ourselves, the more intensive it becomes, the more expensive it becomes. So other types of data we publicly host on larger global cloud environments, for example. So I think even though we are a commercial organization, we treat data in the same way like governments are doing, I think, because you make well-informed decisions per data set, basically, and choose your architecture that's meeting that, but also based on the skills that you have. So if you don't have the skill set to operate a local cloud environment, that's also interesting, right? So you want to, for example, be data sovereign, but if you don't have the skill set.
So absolutely, I totally agree. It's sovereignty becomes kind of a competitive differentiator. So as a company, as a business, you have to show and demonstrate that you are able to host data in a sovereign way, as yours just described for the Netherlands. So there's a lot to it for businesses as well. Yeah.
So again, if I'm hearing this, it's very much back to actually understanding the type of data, the classification is key, because that enables you then to build the right sort of architecture and stack to really address the issue. So super sensitive, super important, keep it local, but that can still be on the cloud, but in a controlled environment, through to stuff that might be more that you need to share and will benefit from sharing. Because I guess one of the sort of things I maybe wanted to touch on a little bit was clearly, as we see machine learning and AI, those data sets benefit from the widest possible input. That the more they can train, the more data they see. So clearly, you don't want a situation where, I guess, the regional, national barriers are coming up, and we're losing the value, in areas like health or pandemics or disaster management, where scalability will, I think, be key to some of the solutions.
It's all about balance.
Yep. And I like that. I like the idea. I think you mentioned risk, which I think is, it's ultimately, it's a trade-off, isn't it? It's the risk and the reward you want to get from the output.
And I think it's also about interoperability, because those different worlds need to interact and need to build on each other, although they might be a little bit separate. So interoperability is key for me as well, and countries or companies will succeed if they don't isolate themselves in a data term completely. So they have to combine the sovereignty, governance, standards, interoperability. Yeah.
Okay, and that's really helpful. So again, and I think you've laid the foundations really well. I suppose just a couple of sort of other questions I really ask. One, I suppose you're both part of, although you're in a very privileged position of being very specific to particular countries in Europe, and but you're also part of ultimately a global organization. How do you see where Europe sits as a region, if we put it in that context, compared to other parts of the world? Are we and in terms of addressing data sovereignty and kind of dealing with some of these issues, are we in a good place? Are there things we should be learning from other regions? Maybe just throw that in, and then we can just look ahead a little bit about some of the things that might happen in the coming years.
Maybe I could start, because I'm convinced the European Union did a rather good job in terms of regulations. There are pros and cons to it. I'm absolutely aware of. So in the EU, we have clear guidelines on the matter, and for example, in the EU, non-European technology is only accepted if the operational control lies within the EU, and the access keys are held by the customer or an EU trustee. So if you want to have real sovereignty, that's what I'm speaking of. So at the moment, we see growing investments in sovereign or national cloud initiatives, and on the other end, or at the same time, a large organization, multinational or national, cannot really abandon hyperscale cloud infrastructure entirely. And so what we will see, and as we discussed already, is a selective sovereignty based on the data you have to deal with. Maybe, Joris, you can go on. It's just my point of view.
I agree. So I think, for example, in the European region, right, we have something, you already have the Data Act, the Cloud Act, and then there's now also the AI Act, I must say. There's also the EU Sovereignty Cloud Framework, where you have several seal levels, which basically helps describe, like, if you choose certain technologies or architectures, how well are you capable of indeed moving between totally not being sovereign to completely data sovereignty and anything in between. And it's likely anything in between, but you make the decisions based on the risks that you're willing to accept and how you mitigate those risks and be in control. And from a practical point of view, I mean, if a European organization located in whether it's the Netherlands or Germany uses a global SaaS product that's operated by a US-based company, like whether it's a SaaS or a cloud-based software, the answer is really simple. You are not data sovereign. It's just a no. It's really simple. But then it becomes, is it an issue? And what type of data are you storing there? And is then in that case the same, for example, technology provider able to provide different deployment patterns so you can meet, well, if you want to use global SaaS, you accept perhaps being less sovereign. But if there's already regional storage, you could increase your seal level from, for example, 0 to 1 because the data is stored in Europe. However, it's still operated by, for example, a US based company. And then you have other architectures where you could implement the same technology, not from a SaaS perspective, but hosted on your own cloud environment, whether it's a sovereign cloud or a European cloud or a local cloud or a cloud that you operate yourself. So you can make the decision on where you want to position yourselves. And I think like in the last year with all the geopolitical discussions going on, initially you saw a lot of discussions going on. I think now more and more the conversation becomes more practical and also more, I would describe it as sort of fruitful, that everybody starts to have the same understanding about it's not a full yes or a full no. It's about accepting those risks that we already mentioned. And, but indeed, for example, Kerstin and I and myself, but also other colleagues within Europe, the way that we, for example, as global company are organized with local entities, for example, in Europe, obviously we collaborate to have constant conversations about where do we actually need to.
A good model for data sovereignty.
Well, yeah, because we actually, there's
governance.
There's local laws. Yep. Each country could be having different local laws. Then there's European laws. Then there's global policy. So you need to have the discussion. So it's a really constructive way how we are organized to actually enforce that. Although, for example, Esri is originated and located in the US, it's a global company. And by having this network of local companies, distributors, how we call them, ensures that we bring the local knowledge and the local requirements when it comes to laws towards the global company and towards how we want to operate and serve users across the world. We are in here for serving our users. So it's not in our interest to reduce access to data or limit access to technology, right? And obviously those questions come up, but it's our job to sort of be in between the US company and the local users. And it's a model that works well. And there's always a phase of evolution. So obviously we are thinking about, okay, how are our technology offerings organized today and what needs to be done in order for 2 years or 5 years or 10 years to meet the changing demand of our customers. But it's the evolution that we do together with our customers. Yeah.
There's a lot also that's not as related, but there are a lot of questions still to be answered. We were speaking here about geographical data. So satellite imagery, for example, it doesn't have sensitive data in itself, the satellite imagery. But if you do some processing and you extract some specific features out or based on this imagery, then it might become more sensitive, and you have to think about where to put it, and can I choose SaaS or can't I choose SaaS, just as Joris just described. So we're always coming back to the question, what kind of data is it? And then you can choose, just as Joris described, where to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting area. I mean, the whole satellite, because I guess it's boundaryless data to start with, isn't it? And even from an ownership and creation perspective, kind of, so sovereignty becomes really interesting when you look at the world from space. So I'm sort of conscious of the time, and it's been really interesting discussions. So just kind of as we sort of bring this to a close, is there anything as we look sort of forward? And Joris, you hinted at a few things in terms of what your organisation is doing, but do you see any key sort of changes that are happening? I know it's really hard in this environment to predict what's going to be happening next week, let alone next month or next year. But do you see any move towards, for example, more standardized global frameworks, or are we going to actually end up being more fragmented, or is it just going to be very much different regions, different nations doing different things to meet their own view of risk and their own specific needs. I don't know, just maybe if we could have some closing comments from both of you, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, so I mean, I cannot predict the future, but at least I can share sort of my feelings about what I've been experiencing for the last couple of years and then also the previous decade. So I think looking 5 or 10 years ahead, personally, I don't think we will be heading towards a single fully standardized global framework. And the reason for that is simply that I think from a geopolitical point of view, legal, cultural differences, the differences will be just simply too large across the globe to go towards one fully standardized global framework. What I, however, do see is that I think, especially I already see this in Europe, is that on one hand, you have the regulatory level, which is moving forward, but there's also greater alignment coming in when it comes to technical and architectural level. So I think based upon what's happening now in the world, we are reassessing technical architectural designs as well, how we can sort of meet both more sovereignty needs, but on the same hand, still ensure that we are capable of addressing those global challenges in a way that we are able to share data globally and with organizations. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all evolves. But I think with regulations in Europe like GDPR, the Data Act, the AI Act, a cloud sovereignty framework, you definitely see a growing sort of framework development coming in, all about claiming control of your data, things like that. So I do think the trend towards more regional, perhaps national, will be sort of an evolution that I do see intensifying. I don't see it completely moving that way because indeed that then, John, it becomes, we go back to a world of silos. And our world is not moving forward when we go that way. There's too many important challenges socially, environmentally that we need to collaboratively work on. So one thing that I'm actually more thinking about myself is also the component of open data. So will this discussion about data sovereignty result in changes in open data policy? So especially in the Netherlands, we've been quite sort of a front runner when it comes to open data. I don't see a direct movement on short term at this point in time, but it will definitely be interesting to see, like, will we become less open or more reluctant to actually share data openly? And I do foresee that we will still be doing, as organizations in the country, municipalities, governments, be sharing data openly, but perhaps there will become new definitions where open data doesn't mean open for everyone, but it will be open for within the boundaries of your country or the boundaries of your region. And that has impact on the architecture, right? So I do foresee more a future where, from a technical point of view, we end up more configuring what I think is, you could describe as sort of environments that are connected with each other. So sort of distributed environments. So where everybody's treating their data in a really sovereign, resilient, trustworthy way, where you as an organization are in control, or where you don't limit data within your own organization boundary, but you are creating trusted through open standards and interoperability, as Kerstin already mentioned, where you have portals across the country or across organizations, across municipalities, across countries perhaps, where they securely work together, where the data sits at the source, but you're still able to authorize other organizations to use the data, because data sharing remains to be very important. So perhaps that will be sort of a evolution where between closed data and open data, there will be something in between, which is still open, but it's open by purpose for specific authorized groups of users or perhaps countries that you want to collaborate with. So I do see some movement. I foresee some movement going towards that direction.
Makes a lot of sense. Kerstin, any final comments, closing remarks?
Not much, because I totally agree with Joris, and I think we will see a federated interoperability, so to speak, rather than universal harmonization of whatsoever. So there will be common standards, but different governance regimes. But in the end, we need to work together. And if this means you have a federated AI and they go to more sovereign data spaces, and the data stays there, but the AI can work with this on the big questions, then that's a good solution. And I hope for it to get more in this way. So yeah, just totally agree with Joris.
Yeah, and I mean, and if we look 5 or 10 years from now, I know one thing very sure, and that's that I'm really confident that the whole conversation and discussion about data sovereignty that will remain dynamic. So that's not going away. That will remain dynamic for the next couple of years, for sure.
Brilliant, and I think that's a great point to end on. And I think you've given us a really fascinating and insightful and really helpful tour through the world of data sovereignty. So thank you very much, Joris. Thank you, Kerstin. Thank you for joining this episode of Horizons. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn as we continue to advance technology and policy matters relevant to the geospatial sector and create business opportunities for the industry. Thank you.
Like, subscribe, and share to help us spread insightful geospatial conversations.